Hey everyone, BBD here for another Versus video, playing against Gindy today, and today I'm going to be playing Junk Aristocrats. It's a deck that kind of sprung up fairly recently, and I've been playing it to fairly good success on Magic Online. I lost my win in Baltimore with the deck, but I still think it's a good choice, even though it's kind of, people aren't really jumping onto it as much, but I still think it's a really good choice right now. And I think the deck's like very powerful, very fun to play, and has like a lot of awesome interactions. So I'm gonna dive right into the deck. Basically, the core of the deck is a lot of cheap creatures, along with like sacrifice outlets in Cartel Aristocrat and Varls to turn on Morbid for things like Skursdag High Priest and Tragic Slip, and to like generate a lot of Blood Artist triggers and things like that. And it's like a very grindy, aggressive style deck. It's kind of able to grind your opponent out by just kind of like getting them down like a couple points at a time, like hitting them a few times with some tutus or some lingering souls, or just draining them out with Blood Artist. But at the same time, it's very resilient to a lot of what your opponent is doing. Even cards like Bonfire that seem like they'd be a huge problem, a lot of times you can like save a good portion of your team from Bonfire just because of like Doom Traveler and Young Wolf creating extra copies when they die, Cartel Aristocrat getting protection, and Voice of Resurgence is basically doing the same thing as like Young Wolf and Doom Traveler can do. So I'm gonna start out with the one drops. We have Doom Traveler and Young Wolf, and basically what separates this deck from the normal black, red, white Aristocrats deck is that we actually have access to like 6 or even potentially 8 if we wanted one drops that can replace themselves when dying. And the reason cards like this are really good is because they really power on your Cartel Aristocrat, which is the best card in the deck, and they power on Skursdag High Priest. In the black, red, white Aristocrats deck, I always thought that Skursdag High Priest was kind of not very good, but it's exceptional here. And the reason is that we actually have so many one drops that can turn him on turn 3. You just have to go like on turn 1 you play a 1-drop, on turn 2 you play a High Priest, and then on turn 3 you just play a Sacrifice Outlet. You get to like sacrifice your Doom Traveler, which creates an untapped Spirit, and then you can use your Doom Traveler, your Sacrifice Outlet, and your Skursdag High Priest to create a demon. So this deck can generate demons as early as turn 3, like reasonably consistently, which is very powerful against a large number of decks in the format. And another advantage is that this deck has Varls as the other sacrifice outlet is 3 mana instead of regular Aristocrats has Falcon Wrath Aristocrat at 4 mana, but having it at 3 mana just gives you an extra outlet to turning on Skursdag High Priest on turn 3. So that's really the advantage of having like the extra 1-drops here, and that's why there's 4 High Priests in the deck. When I first played it, I had 3, and quickly realized that this card just beats a lot of the decks in the format, and I don't want to play less than 4 main deck of this card right now. Blood Artist is another key card in the deck. Blood Artist is very, I don't know, surprisingly powerful. Like it may seem innocuous, but it just does so much. Against any of the aggressive decks, it really like keeps your life total high and makes it very difficult for them to like grind through you, because every time they're attacking you, you're gaining like a couple of life points back, but you're also doing a few points to them, and like eventually you'll reach a point where like you're like, hey, I'm actually winning right now. Like my Blood Artist is like turning the game around, and now I'm ahead. So Blood Artist like does that, but it also like so a lot of times when you can get like 2 Blood Artists into play, it actually just makes like a Cartel Aristocrat just a machine gun, where like you could just start sacrificing your entire board and just kill them in one turn. So there's just a lot of power with Blood Artists in this deck, especially with the high number of creatures we have and how cheap they all are. It's like really easy to get a lot of value out of Blood Artist. Voice of Resurgence is one of the main reasons to play this version over the Act 2 version, and Voice is very powerful. Like it's good against pretty much every deck. There are a couple exceptions, but for the most part, Voice is like just awesome against the field, and like it serves as another Doom Traveler or Young Wolf in terms of being able to like replace itself, so it can turn on your Skursdag High Priests. It also like prevents your opponent from casting spells profitably on your turn, which is like huge like plus against decks like blue, white, red that want to just sit there and cast everything like on your turn. It just prevents them from being able to do that, makes them cast their stuff at sorcery speed. And a lot of times what you can do is just sacrifice the voice at the end of your opponent's turn and just put an enormous token into play. And like with Sorin, Lingering Souls, like Doom Traveler, like all these cards in the deck are creating tokens that are just flooding the board with creatures. So your voice token is often going to be like a 6/6 or an 8/8. So I mean, a 2-mana 8/8. I mean, like that's not too bad. So voice really is a powerhouse in this deck. Cartel Aristocrat, like I said, is just the best card in this deck, and the reason is that it doesn't die to anything. Like Supreme Verdict and Terminus are basically the only cards that kill the card, because again, like we have so many tokens and so many creatures in play that there's always going to be something to sacrifice to give Cartel Aristocrat protection, and Cartel is a source of damage. Like you can give it protection from a color and get in for damage. It kills Planeswalkers really well. It's an awesome sacrifice outlet to turn on Blood Artist, Tragic Slip, and Skurzdag High Priest, and it's just like it's just never gonna die. So it really is the best card in this deck, and it seems innocuous, but the card is very powerful. And then Varls, I actually think, is the worst card in this deck, as surprising as that may be. It's basic. Varls is basically the same as Cartel Aristocrat, except it costs 1 mana more, and that 1 mana is just a huge difference. And Varls is actually oftentimes worse than Cartel Aristocrat because giving protection is generally better than regeneration. So the one exception is Supreme Verdict, but really you'd rather have protection most of the time, because like if you try to regenerate Varls and they putrefy it, it's still going to die. But if you give Cartel Aristocrat protection from black or green, then the putrefy like can't even target it. So protection is just a generally stronger ability. And if you look at our creature base here, like the biggest creature we have is a 2/2. So Varl's scavenge ability, while it's actually still fine, like it's fine to scavenge Young Wolves or Doom Travelers or Skurzdag High Priests, it's not as powerful as it could otherwise be. So really he is actually just the worst card in the deck, but it's still worth playing. You still want to play at least 2 copies though, because you need to have enough sacrifice outlets to turn on like the Tragic Slips and the Skurzdag High Priests. Beyond that, we have 4 Lingering Souls. Lingering Souls is just awesome. Really like does everything here. Even cards like Bonfire and Thundermaw aren't a huge problem for Lingering Souls in this style of deck, because you're going to turn on your Tragic Slips and you're going to be able to flash it back. And like between Sorin and Gavney Township, you can oftentimes kill opponents with just Lingering Souls. So it's actually like this is one of the best Lingering Soul decks in the format, and I think it is the best Sorin deck that I've ever played. Sorin's been underwhelming in a lot of other decks, but he's actually very powerful here. The main reason is that Sorin is very easy to protect. You have so many cheap creatures and so many creatures that are resilient that you get to like play into Sorin, and it just makes it very difficult for your opponent to actually ever kill your Sorin. And then because like we flood the board with so many guys, Sorin's emblem is just like game breaking. So really just everything Sorin does is just awesome in this deck. Even creating a vampire like fuels your Cartel Aristocrats or your Skurzdag High Priest or your Blood Artist. So like Sorin is just awesome in this deck, and it's very easy to protect him, which is like one of the important things. And then lastly, we have like the removal suite. We have 4 Tragic Slip. Because of the sack outlets, because of how everything dies, Tragic Slip's almost always turned on, and it's just the best removal spell because of how cheap it is and how effective it is. It's going to kill everything. And then Orzhov Charm is just a Miser's one of. Like I could see this being a Abrupt Decay just as well, but I like Orzhov Charm for its like versatility, and I really want my removal spells to be able to hit the problematic creatures in the format, which is mostly stuff like Olivia Voldaren, which kind of wrecks this deck, but I want to make sure I have enough answers to Olivia. So between Tragic Slip and Orzhov Charm, usually we'll have something to kill Olivia. And Orzhov Charm can also like bring back a Doom Traveler or a Young Wolf sometimes to get like value out of those. And very rarely, it doesn't happen that often. Sometimes you might want to like bounce one of your creatures to save it. That's usually only relevant with something like a Voice of Resurgence or a Varls, and usually only in like some of the grindier matchups. So that doesn't come up that often, but it is something to keep in mind. The mana base is pretty straightforward. Basics are for chumps. I'm all in on shocklands and dual lands here. And we have two Gavany Townships, which are two of the best cards in this deck. I love me some Township, and it's just really awesome in this deck, especially with like Lingering Souls and Sorin, and like Doom Travelers and all the cards like that. One thing to keep in mind though is if you do Gavany Township a Young Wolf, it'll have a counter on it, and it won't be able to undie anymore. So sometimes you want to like sacrifice your Young Wolf for some effect before you activate Gavany Township. But anyway, this is the main deck. I'm now going to touch briefly on the sideboard. Alright, so we have three Deathrite Shamans, and Deathrite is mainly for like Junk Reanimator or some of the new 4-color Reanimator decks that have sprung up recently. But Deathrite's actually like just such a versatile card that it comes in a lot of matchups as well. For example, I definitely want to bring it in against any kind of a control deck just to turn off their Snapcaster Mages and get in a few points of damage that doesn't rely on the attack step. Like, your Deathrite's going to deal damage even if they're holding Azorius Charm, unlike some of your other creatures. So Deathrite's like super versatile card and very powerful. I even like a couple of Deathrites sometimes against certain like red-based aggressive decks, just as a way to gain some life. And he's a 1/2 and not a human, so a lot of the creatures in the deck are human, and Deathrite's one of the few cards that actually can come down on turn 1 and trade with a Stromkirk Noble, which is actually pretty important a lot of times too. Two Sin Collectors. This is mostly for like blue-white red or like Esper control, which is kind of fallen away from the radar. But Sin Collector can also come in against decks like the other Aristocrat deck, the Act 2 deck, just to strip things like Blasphemous Act or Mark of Mutinies or the like. And Sin Collector is also alright against Jund. I don't know if I like it a lot there, but it can like steal their bonfires or their putrefies to protect your creatures. So it's just a versatile card, and this deck really actually makes use of the body pretty well between like all the sacrifice outlets and Varls. So having Sin Collector I think is more important than something like Duress just because of the body. We have two Garruk Relentless. This is a card I've like taken in and out of the deck as I've made changes, but he's kind of back in at this point, and I really like Garruk against like Junk Reanimator and Jund. He's like very powerful against Junk Reanimator by like fighting their mana dudes and trying to stifle their like mana development, and then you can threaten his overrun ability, or you can basically like start searching up creatures that are really good against them, like Skurzak, High Priest, or the like. Against Jund, you want it to kill Huntmasters mainly, and it's also good against Olivia sometimes if you can get it the turn they play the Olivia. And a lot of times you can just get them by like just generating a wolf every turn and putting a lot of pressure into play. As for Profit Loss, this is kind of a newer one to the sideboard. This is mainly a nod to the Mirror Match, where this card's just a huge blowout, killing Blood Artists, Lingering Souls tokens, Sorin Vampires, etc. The Profit side can actually protect against their Profit Loss too if needed. But Profit Loss is actually good in a number of matchups beyond just the Mirror. It's good against the other Aristocrats decks, and it's actually also good against like black-red zombies or just black-red aggro, because it kills like Falconwrath Aristocrats and Grave Crawlers and like Spike Jesters and anything like that. Same with some of the mono-red decks that are playing like Firefist Strikers now and cards like that. There's a lot of cards that are dying to loss. So this card's actually like gone up a lot in value, and I wouldn't cut it until the metagame changes. I definitely like its place in the sideboard. 3 Appetite for Brains. That's mainly to beat both Junk Aristocrats and Jund. The two most powerful cards in those decks against you are Angel Serenity and Olivia, and Appetite is just the best answer in the format to both of those cards because it deals with those cards before they come into play, which is like super important. Olivia, if they play it with more than 4 mana, they can at least kill like one guy before you get to kill it, even if you have a Tragic Slip. And Angel Serenity is going to get at least 3 guys, even if you have a Tragic Slip. So the best thing to do is to just get it before they can even cast it. And Appetite's the best card to do that, and it even exiles it too, which is great against Unburial Rites. And then lastly, we have 3 Abrupt Decays. That's pretty much for like the aggressive decks, just another removal spell. Side out some of our like more clunky cards against those decks, and just like overload on like Tragic Slips and Abrupt Decays to really kill all their early guys before we can like set up a board state that they can't like overcome with like Blood Artist and Cartel Aristocrats and the like. But Abrupt Decay actually like also serves some other roles too. It's good against cards like Rest in Peace, which this deck otherwise can't beat, and it's good against stuff like Detention Sphere as well. So it's a very versatile card, but mainly for the aggressive matchups. At any rate, this is the Junk Aristocrats deck. I'm pretty excited to be playing it again today, and hopefully it will play out pretty well.